The notice taped to my front door looked like it had been slapped there with the same passive-aggressive energy that I'd come to expect from Susan Carmichael, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association in Bloomington, Minnesota. I pulled it off, squinting at the bold red text that screamed a $300 fine for failure to maintain safe walking conditions on assigned community pathways. My name is Nathan Owens, and I'd lived in this supposedly idyllic suburban community for 3 years without major incident. Sure, there'd been the usual HOA nonsense, complaints about my mailbox being 2 inches too far to the left or my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, but nothing like this. I read the notice again, my breath fogging in the February cold as I stood on my porch in my thermal jacket and work boots. The fine was for ice accumulation on the sidewalk leading to the community mailbox cluster that served our section of the neighborhood. The thing was, I'd shoveled that path the morning after the snowstorm 3 days ago. I'd spent 45 minutes out there with my snow shovel, clearing not just the path from my house, but the entire walkway to the mailboxes, because I actually gave a damn about my neighbors not breaking their hips. But here's the kicker. 2 days after I'd shoveled, we'd had freezing rain. The kind that turns everything into a skating rink, no matter how much you prepare. I'd put down salt on my own driveway and the path immediately in front of my house. But I hadn't thought to trek all the way down to the mailboxes at 10 o'clock at night during an ice storm to salt a community pathway that technically wasn't even part of my property. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number listed on the notice. It rang 4 times before Susan's nasally voice answered. Maple Ridge HOA, this is Susan speaking. Susan, it's Nathan Owens from 4782 Ridgeview Court. I just got this fine notice about ice on the sidewalk, and I need to understand something. I shoveled that entire pathway the morning after the snowstorm. The ice that formed 2 days later was from freezing rain, and I was under the impression that the HOA was responsible for maintaining the common areas during weather events. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her shuffling papers with that self-important air she always carried. Mr. Owens, according to our bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, homeowners are responsible for maintaining all pathways within 50 feet of their property line. The mailbox cluster falls within your 50-foot radius. I shoveled the snow, Susan. The ice formed from rain. That's an act of nature. The bylaw states maintenance includes ensuring safe passage at all times during winter months. That includes preventive salting and monitoring for ice formation. The board voted unanimously to uphold this fine. You have 30 days to pay, or we'll add it to your HOA dues with a 15% late fee. My jaw clenched. This is ridiculous. I'm not paying a fine for something that was completely outside my control. Then we'll see you at the next board meeting where you can formally appeal. 3rd Thursday of the month, 7 p.m. at the community center. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Owens. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling that familiar burn of injustice creeping up my spine. This wasn't about safety or community standards. This was about Susan and her little band of busybodies flexing their authority because they had nothing better to do with their lives. I went back inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. Section 12, Paragraph 4 did exist, but it was vaguely worded enough that it could be interpreted multiple ways. The phrase reasonable maintenance appeared 3 times. I'd absolutely provided reasonable maintenance by clearing the snow. Expecting me to monitor weather conditions and run out during an ice storm was not reasonable by any stretch. My wife, Rachel, came into the kitchen holding our 2-year-old daughter, Emma. What's wrong? You look like you're about to explode. I showed her the notice. Rachel read it and sighed. Are you kidding me? You were out there for almost an hour clearing that path. I remember because Emma kept asking where Daddy was. Susan says I should have been monitoring for ice and salting preventively. That's insane. We're not professional groundskeepers. I'm going to fight this at the board meeting. Rachel set Emma down in her high chair and came over to rub my shoulders. Just be careful. You know how Susan gets when people challenge her. She was right. Susan Carmichael was a 52-year-old former real estate agent who'd made it her life's mission to run the HOA like her personal fiefdom. She had perfectly highlighted blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive bob cut that somehow screamed, "I need to speak to the manager," even in silence. She wore pantsuits to neighborhood gatherings and always had her tablet clutched to her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes instead of violation notices and fine schedules. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing my case. I printed weather reports showing the timing of the freezing rain. I took photos of the pathway showing that the ice had formed on top of cleared concrete, proving I'd done my due diligence with the snow removal. I even got statements from 3 neighbors, including old Mr. Patterson from across the street, who confirmed he'd seen me shoveling that morning. The night of the board meeting arrived with that peculiar Minnesota cold that makes your nose hairs freeze when you breathe. I drove to the community center, a bland brick building that hosted everything from yoga classes to these bureaucratic nightmares. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where Susan sat flanked by the other board members. Tom Richardson, a retired banker who nodded along with everything Susan said. Patricia Monroe, a nervous woman in her 60s who seemed terrified of conflict. And David Chen, the only reasonable person on the board who actually listened before voting. About 15 other homeowners sat in the folding chairs, most there for other issues. I recognized a few faces but kept to myself, reviewing my notes. Susan called the meeting to order with a crack of her gavel that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. They went through old business, approved some landscaping expenses, and discussed the summer pool schedule before finally reaching appeals. Next, we have Nathan Owens appealing a winter maintenance fine. Mr. Owens, you have 5 minutes. I stood and walked to the front, setting my folder of evidence on a small podium they'd set up. Thank you. I'm appealing the $300 fine issued for ice on the community pathway. I'd like to present evidence that I fully complied with all reasonable maintenance expectations. I walked them through everything: the weather timeline, the photos, the neighbor statements. I pointed out that the bylaw specified reasonable maintenance and that expecting homeowners to predict and prevent weather-related ice formation went beyond reasonable. I cleared the snow thoroughly within 12 hours of the storm ending. The ice that formed 2 days later came from freezing rain, which no amount of preventive salting would have stopped. I wasn't going to go out in the middle of an ice storm at night to salt a pathway when it was still actively precipitating. I thought it was a solid case. David Chen was nodding. Even Patricia looked sympathetic. Susan, however, had that pinched expression she got when someone dared to question her authority. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Owens. The board will now deliberate. She didn't even leave the room. They just turned their chairs slightly and had a hushed conversation for maybe 90 seconds. Susan turned back around. The board has voted 3-1 to uphold the fine. While we appreciate your snow removal efforts, the ice hazard existed, and someone could have been injured. The bylaw is clear about maintaining safe passage. Our decision stands. This is absurd, I said, my voice rising slightly. I did everything a reasonable person would do. The decision is final. You can file a written appeal with the management company, but I should tell you that in 5 years, they've never overturned one of our rulings. Next item on the agenda. I gathered my materials and walked out, too angry to sit through the rest of their procedural nonsense. In the parking lot, David Chen caught up with me. "For what it's worth, I voted against upholding the fine," he said. "I thought you made a solid case. 1 vote out of 4 doesn't help me much. I know. Susan has it out for you, though. Ever since you questioned her about those landscaping contracts last year, she's been looking for ways to assert dominance. This is a power play. Well, it's a $300 power play that I don't have to just accept." David gave me a sympathetic look. "Just pay the fine, Nathan. Trust me, fighting Susan only makes things worse." But I wasn't going to pay the fine. Not because of the money, though $300 wasn't nothing, but because it was the principle. I'd done what was required, and being punished for a weather event I couldn't control was fundamentally unjust. Over the next week I stewed. I paid my other bills but left the HOA fine untouched. Then another snowstorm hit, this one dumping 8 inches overnight on a Tuesday. Wednesday morning, I got up early as usual and started clearing my driveway and the sidewalk directly in front of my house. Rachel came out with coffee. "Aren't you going to clear the path to the mailboxes?" I stopped shoveling and leaned on the handle. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I'm not clearing it. They want to fine me for ice that forms after I clear the path. Then they can deal with snow that never gets cleared at all. Nathan, people need to get their mail. Then the HOA can clear it, or they can wait for it to melt. Or anyone else who lives within 50 feet of that mailbox cluster can do it. According to Susan's interpretation of the bylaws, at least 6 other houses are also within that radius. Let one of them handle it." Rachel looked uncertain. "Are you sure this is the way to handle it?" "They want to play games with unreasonable rules and subjective enforcement. Fine. I'll follow their bylaws to the letter. The bylaw says I'm responsible for maintenance within 50 feet of my property line. The mailboxes are 48 feet from my property line, but there are multiple other properties also within that range. If I'm going to be fined for ice regardless of what I do, then I'm not going to waste my time and effort on preventive measures that apparently don't matter." It was petty. I knew it was petty. But after years of dealing with Susan's arbitrary enforcement and power trips, I'd reached my limit. The snow sat untouched on the pathway to the mailboxes. By Thursday, I saw neighbors trudging through it, some shooting glances toward my house. Mr. Patterson knocked on my door that evening. "Nathan, I hate to ask, but are you going to clear the path? I nearly took a spill today trying to get my mail." "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson, but according to the HOA, my snow clearing isn't adequate since they fined me for ice that formed after I cleared it last time. I'm not going to keep doing work that apparently doesn't meet their standards." He frowned. "That seems a bit extreme." "You know what's extreme? A $300 fine for weather I can't control after spending an hour doing work that benefited everyone. If the HOA wants that path maintained to their exacting standards, they can hire someone or do it themselves." Mr. Patterson left looking disappointed, which stung a bit. I liked the old guy, but I wasn't backing down. By Friday, 3 more neighbors had called or stopped by. Susan, predictably, left a voicemail. "Mr. Owens, this is Susan Carmichael. Multiple residents have complained about the unmaintained pathway to the mailbox cluster. As we discussed, this falls within your maintenance responsibility. Please clear the path immediately, or we'll be forced to hire a service and bill you for the cost plus an administrative fee." I didn't return the call. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and watching through my window as a red-faced Susan Carmichael stood on the snow-covered pathway, taking photos with her tablet. She was wearing a puffy coat that made her look like an angry marshmallow, her breath coming out in furious little clouds. She marched up to my door and pounded on it. I took my time answering. "Yes, Susan. You need to clear this pathway immediately. According to your bylaws, I need to provide reasonable maintenance. I've determined that clearing pathways that result in fines for subsequent weather conditions isn't reasonable. If I'm going to be held liable for ice regardless, then I'm eliminating the risk by not clearing the snow in the first place." Her face was turning an impressive shade of purple. "That's not how this works." "Really? Because you told me I was responsible for maintaining safe passage at all times." "Well, I can't guarantee that, so I'm not attempting it. Feel free to hire a service if the HOA wants it cleared to your standards. I believe common areas are supposed to be maintained by the association anyway." The bylaw clearly uses subjective language about reasonable maintenance. I maintained it reasonably last time and got fined, so I've learned my lesson. I'm not maintaining it at all now. We will fine you again. Go ahead. I'm not paying the first fine, and I won't pay any additional ones either. Take me to court if you want. I'd love to explain to a judge how I got fined for ice that formed from freezing rain after I'd already cleared the snow. Susan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She spun on her heel and nearly slipped on the icy portion of my driveway that connected to the street. She caught herself on my mailbox and shot me a venomous glare before stomping back to her car. Monday morning, I found another notice. $500 this time for willful neglect of community maintenance responsibilities and failure to comply with board directives. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the recycling bin. The week progressed with increasing ridiculousness. The snow on the pathway remained, getting packed down by foot traffic into an uneven, hazardous mess. More neighbors complained, but I stood firm. A few actually sided with me once they heard about the original fine. Jennifer Martinez from 2 houses down stopped by with her daughter. "I heard what happened. Susan fined me last year for having a wreath on my door past January 5th. The bylaws say holiday decorations down by January 1st, but my wreath didn't even have holiday stuff on it, just winter flowers. She made me pay $75. "I think what you're doing is great. I'm not trying to punish anyone," I said. "I just don't see why I should put in work that results in fines when weather happens." "No, I get it. Susan needs to be knocked down a peg. She acts like she's running a dictatorship." More people started weighing in. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I rarely checked, exploded with arguments. Some people thought I was being childish. Others shared their own stories of unreasonable HOA enforcement. The thread got so heated that the moderator shut it down. Susan sent certified letters to my house. I refused to sign for them. She called and left increasingly aggressive voicemails about legal action and lien placement. Then, 2 weeks after the second snowstorm, we got a third. This one was worse. 12 inches of heavy, wet snow that took me 2 hours to clear from just my driveway and front walk. The pathway to the mailboxes looked like an Arctic wasteland. That evening I got a call from David Chen. "Nathan, I need to give you a heads up. Susan called an emergency board meeting. She's pushing to place a lien on your property for the unpaid fines and to hire a legal firm to pursue action against you. Let her try. I'm serious. She's not backing down, and Tom and Patricia always vote with her. This could get expensive for you." "It's going to get expensive for the HOA too. I've already contacted a lawyer. Everything I'm doing is within my rights. I cleared the snow the first time and got punished for subsequent weather. Now I'm simply not volunteering my labor for community benefit when that labor results in penalties." If they want to claim I'm violating bylaws, we'll let a court decide what reasonable maintenance means." David sighed. "I tried. Good luck, man. The emergency meeting happened without me." According to the minutes that got emailed out, the board voted to place both fines as liens against my property and authorized spending up to $5,000 on legal consultation. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Lisa Garrett who specialized in property law, found the whole thing amusing. "They're going to lose," she told me during our consultation in her office in downtown Bloomington. "The bylaw language is too vague, and you have clear documentation that you performed maintenance before receiving the first fine. Any reasonable judge will see this as arbitrary enforcement. Plus, HOAs have to follow their own rules consistently. Have they fined the other 6 property owners who are also within 50 feet of that mailbox cluster? I don't think so. Then they're selectively enforcing. That's textbook discrimination. We can fight this, and honestly, we might even be able to go after them for legal fees and harassment. I just want them to drop the fines and leave me alone. We'll start with a formal response. I'll draft something that outlines your position and the legal weaknesses in theirs." Often that's enough to make HOA boards back down once they realize they might actually lose. Lisa sent her letter the following week. It was beautiful. 3 pages of legal reasoning that basically said the HOA was full of it and would get demolished in court. She included case precedents from Minnesota and other states where similar selective enforcement had resulted in judgments against HOAs. Susan's response came through the HOA's lawyer, a guy named Marcus Webb from some firm in Minneapolis. His letter was full of bluster about board authority and homeowner obligations, but was notably light on actual legal reasoning. Meanwhile, the mailbox pathway remained buried. A few neighbors had given up and were driving to the post office to collect their mail. Others formed a rotation to shovel sections, though nobody wanted to take responsibility for the whole thing. Mr. Patterson slipped on the icy, uneven surface someone had half cleared and fell hard. He didn't break anything, thank God, but he bruised his hip badly. His daughter came to stay with him for a few days to help out. She knocked on my door that Saturday, a woman in her 30s with her father's kind eyes but a steel edge to her expression. My father could have been seriously hurt. "I know, and I'm sorry about that. How's he doing?" "He's okay, but that's not the point. This pathway is dangerous." "You're right. It is. Which is why the HOA should be maintaining it properly instead of playing games with unreasonable fines. So you're willing to risk people getting hurt because you're having a pissing contest with Susan." That hit harder than I expected. "No. I'm trying to establish that the HOA can't punish people for things outside their control. I cleared that path completely after the first storm and got fined because ice formed later. I can't prevent weather. Nobody can." "Then you should have just paid the fine and moved on." "It was $300 for something I didn't do wrong. Where does it end? What's the next arbitrary fine? What happens when Susan decides my mailbox is ugly or my car is the wrong color?" She studied me for a long moment. "My dad likes you. He says you're normally reasonable, but this doesn't look reasonable." After she left, Rachel found me sitting at the kitchen table, having second thoughts. Mr. Patterson could have really been hurt. But he wasn't, and that wasn't your fault. Other people have been walking that path. Someone tried to clear part of it. There are multiple properties within range. This isn't all on you, Nathan. Tell that to Susan. Susan's a control freak who's never been told no. Someone needs to stand up to her, and you're doing that. Don't let her make you feel guilty for enforcing reasonable boundaries." Rachel was right, but it still gnawed at me. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted fair treatment. The next HOA board meeting was packed. Word had spread about the conflict, and apparently, it was the most entertaining thing to happen in Maple Ridge in years. I showed up with Lisa, who'd agreed to accompany me as a show of force. Susan's eyes narrowed when she saw the lawyer. "Mr. Owens, this is a community meeting, not a courtroom. Miss Garrett is here as my advisor, unless there's a bylaw against homeowners having representation at meetings," David Chen, bless him, spoke up. "There's no such bylaw. Let's proceed." The meeting was tense. Susan tried to control the narrative, painting me as a selfish troublemaker who was endangering the community. Several neighbors spoke against me, particularly those who'd had to struggle through the snow. But then Jennifer Martinez stood up. "Can I say something? Susan fined me last year for a wreath. She fined the Hendersons for having a basketball hoop that she claimed was visible from the street even though it was in their backyard. She fined Marco at the end of the block for his grass being too long when he was out of town caring for his dying mother. Everyone in this room has a story about unreasonable fines or complaints. Nathan is the first person who's actually pushed back. That opened the floodgates. Person after person stood up sharing their own experiences with what they felt was overzealous enforcement. Tom Richardson looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia Monroe was openly squirming. Susan tried to regain control. "These complaints are outside the scope of tonight's agenda." Lisa stood up. "Actually, they're not. They establish a pattern of arbitrary enforcement, which is directly relevant to my client's situation. You fined Mr. Owens for weather conditions he couldn't control while simultaneously demanding he maintain a community area that arguably falls under HOA responsibility. Furthermore, you've selectively enforced this supposed 50-foot rule without fining other homeowners whose properties are equidistant from the mailboxes. The other homeowners aren't the ones who stopped clearing the path," Susan shot back, "because they were never clearing it in the first place. Mr. Owens voluntarily maintained that pathway for 3 years without complaint, until you arbitrarily decided to fine him for ice formation. He performed the exact same snow clearing he'd always done, but this time you chose to punish him for subsequent weather. That's not enforcement, that's retaliation." The room was dead silent. Tom Richardson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this issue and review our bylaws with legal counsel." "There's nothing to review," Susan insisted. "The bylaws are clear." "The bylaws are vague," Lisa corrected. "And that vagueness works in favor of homeowners, not the HOA. If you want to enforce specific requirements, you need specific language. Reasonable maintenance is subjective, and my client acted reasonably. More than reasonably, actually, since he was maintaining a community area that benefits everyone." Patricia Monroe spoke up, her voice shaky. "Could we maybe just drop the fines and move forward? It seems like there's been a misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding," Susan said coldly. "Mr. Owens deliberately stopped maintaining the pathway in violation of our bylaws." "After you fined him for maintaining it," David Chen interjected. "Come on, Susan. This is ridiculous, and you know it." "I move to vote on the issue," Susan declared. "All in favor of pursuing legal action against Nathan Owens for bylaw violations." Tom Richardson hesitated before raising his hand. Susan raised hers immediately. Patricia and David didn't move. "Motion fails 2-2, David announced. "Per our bylaws, ties mean no action is taken." Susan looked like she might explode. This isn't over, but it kind of was. Without board approval for legal action, Susan couldn't use HOA funds to pursue the case. She'd have to drop it or pay for a lawyer herself, which everyone knew she wouldn't do. The meeting adjourned in chaos. Outside, several neighbors came up to thank me or shake my hand. Mr. Patterson's daughter approached again. "I still think you could have handled this differently, but I heard what everyone said in there. I didn't realize Susan was like that with everyone. She means well, I think. She just doesn't know when to back off. That's generous of you." Maybe it was. Or maybe I was just tired of being angry. The fines remained technically on my account, but no further action was taken. Susan stopped calling. The pathway to the mailboxes stayed mostly clear because people organized themselves to share the work, which honestly was how it should have been all along. 3 months later, at the annual meeting where board positions were up for election, Susan ran unopposed for president as usual. Except this year, Jennifer Martinez threw her hat in the ring at the last minute. "I've lived here for 8 years, Jennifer said during the brief candidate speeches. "And I've watched our HOA become less about community and more about control. I'm running because I think we can do better. We can enforce standards without being petty. We can maintain property values without making people afraid to live their lives." The vote wasn't even close. Jennifer won by a landslide. Tom Richardson didn't run for re-election. Patricia stayed on but seemed relieved to have different leadership. David Chen remained, and they added 2 new members who'd been vocal about reform. One of Jennifer's first acts as president was reviewing the bylaw language around maintenance responsibilities. They clarified that community pathways and common areas were HOA responsibility, unless specifically adopted by a homeowner through written agreement. They also established clear, objective standards for things like lawn height, decorations, and other frequently contentious issues. My fines were formally voided at that meeting. Jennifer made the motion, David seconded it, and it passed unanimously. Susan attended the meeting but sat in the back, arms crossed, not saying a word. When it was over, she left without speaking to anyone. I actually felt a little bad for her. She'd built her identity around being HOA president, and now that was gone. A few weeks after the election, I ran into her at the grocery store. We made awkward eye contact down the cereal aisle. She started to turn away, then stopped. "You destroyed what I built." "Susan, I just wanted to be treated fairly. I was trying to maintain standards. This neighborhood was pristine before people like you started challenging every little rule. Standards are fine. Arbitrary enforcement isn't. You fined me for ice that formed after I'd already cleared the snow." "How is that fair?" She didn't have an answer for that. Her face crumpled slightly, and for a moment she looked small and lost. "I gave this neighborhood everything." "I know you did. But you can't control everything, and you can't punish people for things they can't control." She grabbed her cart and walked away without another word. I actually hoped she'd find some peace, some other outlet for her energy that didn't involve wielding power over her neighbors. Under Jennifer's leadership, the HOA became what it was supposed to be: a functional organization that handled common area maintenance, organized community events, and enforced reasonable standards without being tyrannical about it. Lawn heights had a grace period if you were sick or traveling. Holiday decorations had sensible timelines that accounted for weather. The path to the mailboxes got cleared by a service the HOA hired, funded by our dues. Life in Maple Ridge improved dramatically. People stopped living in fear of violation notices. The Facebook group became about actual neighborhood news and organizing social events, rather than complaint threads. I went back to shoveling my own driveway and sidewalk without drama. Sometimes I'd throw some salt on the path to the mailboxes if I was already out and had extra, but it wasn't my responsibility, and nobody expected it of me. Rachel and I hosted a block party that summer. Over 30 neighbors showed up. We grilled burgers. The kids ran through sprinklers. And for the first time in years, It actually felt like a community rather than a collection of people avoiding each other to prevent HOA complaints. Mr. Patterson made a full recovery from his fall and was back to his daily walks. He still stopped by occasionally to chat about sports or comment on my lawn care, but in a friendly way, not an inspection way. Jennifer proved to be an excellent HOA president. She was firm when needed but fair. She listened to complaints but insisted on evidence and consistency. Most importantly, she remembered that the HOA existed to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. About 6 months after Susan's ouster, I heard she'd sold her house and moved to Arizona. Someone said she'd bought a condo in an adult community where she could sit by the pool and complain about snowbirds instead of snow removal. I hoped the desert agreed with her. The whole experience taught me something valuable about standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. I hadn't wanted conflict. I just wanted fair treatment. But sometimes you have to fight for that, even if it means being temporarily unpopular or dealing with confrontation. Would I do it again? Absolutely. But hopefully I wouldn't have to. The new HOA board operated with transparency and reason, and that made all the difference. On a crisp fall morning about a year after the whole mess started, I was raking leaves in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A young couple got out, looking excited and nervous the way new homeowners do. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Maple Ridge. I'm Nathan." "I'm Chris, and this is my wife, Amanda. We just closed yesterday. Congratulations. This is a great neighborhood." Amanda looked relieved. "That's good to hear. We were worried because we read some stuff online about HOA drama, something about fines and a board president getting voted out." I laughed. "Yeah, we had some growing pains, but it's better now. The HOA is actually pretty reasonable these days. So we don't have to worry about getting fined for random stuff. As long as you're not painting your house neon green or keeping goats in your backyard, you'll be fine. And even then, they'd probably just ask you to fix it before issuing any fines." Chris and Amanda visibly relaxed. We chatted for a few more minutes about good contractors, the best pizza place nearby, and where to find a reliable snow removal service if they didn't want a shovel themselves. As I walked back to my yard, I felt genuinely good about the neighborhood for the first time in a long time. We'd gone through a rough patch, but we'd come out stronger and more united. That was worth the fight. The mailbox pathway stayed clear all through the following winter, maintained by the HOA's contracted service. I never got another fine. Life was good. Sometimes Rachel would joke about the whole incident. "Remember when you went to war with the HOA over snow?" "I didn't go to war. I just stopped volunteering for punishment." "You stopped shoveling the mailbox path out of spite." "Not spite. Principle." "Sure, honey. Whatever helps you sleep at night." But she said it with a smile, and we both knew that standing up to Susan's overreach had been the right call, even if the method was a bit petty. Emma, our daughter, was too young to remember any of it. But someday when she was older, maybe I'd tell her the story. About how sometimes you have to push back against unreasonable authority. About how one person standing firm can inspire others to find their voices. About how communities work best when they're built on fairness rather than fear. The path to the mailboxes was just a path, a stretch of sidewalk maybe 40 feet long. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The question of whether an HOA existed to serve its members or control them. Under Susan, it had been control. Under Jennifer, it became service. That shift didn't happen because of one dramatic moment. It happened because enough people got tired of the status quo and decided to change it. I wasn't a hero. I was just a guy who got fed up with an unjust fine and responded in the most passive-aggressive way possible. But sometimes that's enough to spark change. The seasons cycled through. Summer, fall, winter, spring, and back again. The mailbox path was cleared when it snowed. The grass was mowed in the summer. And the HOA dues we paid actually went toward maintaining the community rather than funding vindictive enforcement. I saw Susan one more time before she moved, at a coffee shop in town. She was sitting alone, typing on a laptop, looking smaller somehow without her HOA president armor. Our eyes met. She didn't smile, but she gave a tiny nod of acknowledgement before returning to her screen. I nodded back. There was nothing left to say. The fight was over and we'd both moved on. At the next annual meeting, Jennifer presented a new community initiative, a volunteer committee to organize neighborhood events and foster connections between residents. 15 people signed up immediately. "This is what an HOA should be," Jennifer said. "Not about fines and violations, but about building community. About making this place somewhere people want to live, not somewhere they are afraid to step out of line." Everyone applauded, and I felt proud to be part of it. We transformed something negative into something positive. That was the real victory. The path to the mailboxes, that 40-foot stretch of sidewalk that had caused so much conflict, was just a path again. People walked it every day to get their mail, never thinking about the battle that had been fought over its maintenance. And that was exactly how it should be. Life in Maple Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA functioned smoothly under reasonable leadership. Neighbors actually talked to each other without suspicion. Kids played in yards without parents worrying about noise complaints. It was the suburban ideal that had been promised when we'd all bought our houses, finally delivered. I never stopped feeling a small sense of satisfaction when I passed that path, though. Every time I walked by to get my mail, I remembered the principle I'd stood up for. Not every battle is worth fighting, but some are. This one had been. The $300 fine that started it all seemed almost laughably small in retrospect. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being treated fairly, about pushing back against arbitrary authority, and about refusing to accept punishment for things you didn't do wrong. Those lessons had value far beyond a suburban HOA dispute. They were principles worth defending, whether you were fighting a tyrannical board president or facing any other kind of unjust treatment. As I raked leaves that fall afternoon, watching Chris and Amanda unpack their moving truck, I felt content. The neighborhood had weathered its storm and emerged better for it. The HOA served its purpose without overstepping. People lived their lives without fear. And somewhere in Arizona, Susan was probably finding new battles to fight, new rules to enforce, new neighbors to irritate. That was her journey, not mine. Mine was here, in this community we'd reclaimed from fear and turned back into a home. Where pathways got cleared not because someone would be fined if they weren't, but because neighbors took care of each other. Where standards were maintained not through threats, but through mutual pride in our shared space. The path to the mailboxes would be cleared this winter and every winter after. But it would be cleared the right way, by people whose job it was to clear it, funded by fairly collected dues, maintained by reasonable standards. And I'd shovel my driveway and sidewalk, salt my steps, and maybe throw down some ice melt if I saw a slick spot. But I'd do it because I wanted to, not because I was afraid of being punished for whatever weather might follow. That freedom, that simple ability to be a good neighbor without fear of retaliation, was worth every uncomfortable moment of the fight. It was worth standing in front of that board meeting with my documentation and arguments. It was worth the dirty looks from neighbors who thought I was being petty. It was worth the stress and the conflict and the uncertainty, because in the end, We'd won. Not just me, but everyone who'd been living under Susan's thumb. We'd won back our community, our autonomy, and our peace of mind. The path was just a path again, cleared in winter, walked upon daily, forgotten as it should be. And that, more than anything else, was the truest measure of victory.